Hey guys, Sam here, and today I wanted to show you how to make those classic New York black and white cookies. If you've ever seen them before, they're usually huge, like almost the size of your face, half black on top, half white on top, fairly plain cakey cookie. Let's go ahead and make them very easy. Get your oven preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. For this recipe, we're going to be using just 1/2 cup or 1 stick of softened unsalted butter. And before I go any further, I want to tell you this recipe makes like 18 cookies if you're gonna make them small the way I normally like to, but if you wanna make them big, which I'll show you how to do today, it's only going to make like 7 cookies. Feel free to double this recipe, no problems with doubling it. So 1/2 cup, 113 grams of butter. You'll need 3/4 cup or 150 grams of granulated sugar here. And we're going to beat these together until it's light and fluffy. All right, next thing you need is 1 large egg. Ideally, this should be room temperature, but that's not as pressing of an issue with this recipe as it is in some of my others. A little messy there. Okay, we'll add that. And then we'll add our vanilla extract. You just need a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. As I may have mentioned earlier, these cookies are very different from your classic chocolate chip. They are quite cakey. They're supposed to be. I really tried to emulate that classic black and white cookie texture all the way through. Spent a lot of time on these. All right, let's stir this together. And of course, this recipe could absolutely be made in a stand mixer if you have one and prefer that. Today, I am just using my electric hand mixer. Regardless of how you are mixing, it is always a good idea to pause periodically and scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl, because ensuring that your ingredients are well incorporated is very important to making sure anything turns out properly. All right, this looks pretty good. Looks great. Pat myself on the back here. Stuff's very easy. And let's grab a different bowl for our dry ingredients. We're going to start with 1 2/3 cups of cake flour. Cake flour really is important to giving you like the classic texture and the finer crumb that you're going to find in like a New York bakery. I will include instructions in the description if you only have all-purpose flour and it's like the middle of the night and you really want to make these anyway. But I do want to note that they turn out better with cake flour. If you're going to substitute, see my notes. Don't take it upon yourself to make something up, because I've been having that happen a lot with my cake flour recipes and then people get mad at me, but I do have instructions. It sounds like our oven's preheated. And that is 190 grams of cake flour. And then we'll add 3/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and just a small bit of baking soda goes a long way. That's 1/8 teaspoon. And then for our salt, you will need a 1/2 teaspoon of table salt. We'll go ahead and stir everything together. Get your dry ingredients well incorporated. Okay, we're going to add this to our butter mixture in just a moment, but before we go any further, we want to measure out our buttermilk. Buttermilk is another key ingredient. It works better than regular milk because you're going to get more depth of flavor and a more moist and tender crumb that's still stable enough for icing. I have a substitute if you need it, but the real stuff's best. Am I talking too much? Sorry, I feel like all these things are important to know. We're going to alternate adding the dry ingredients and the buttermilk, and you can do this by hand or just use your mixer on low speed. Just start with the flour mixture. When that's mostly combined, I'll add like 1/2 of the buttermilk. We'll add more of our flour mixture. So flour goes in 3 parts, buttermilk in 2. And more buttermilk. We will, of course, scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl again. Make sure everything's nice and uniform. All right, you are going to need a parchment paper-lined baking sheet. I find the huge cookies to be a little bit much, which is kind of saying a lot considering like I have like the biggest sweet tooth of anyone I know. So typically when I make these, I use my 1½ tablespoon scoop, do a level 1½ tablespoon. I'm going to do a batch each way so you can see both of them, but for those large cookies, you're going to need 1/4 cup of batter or dough per cookie. So I like using this cookie scoop here. I'll try to remember to link to it. We'll do like a couple of these big guys. Give them space because they are going to spread. And the larger cookies usually need about 12 to 14 minutes in the oven. And we'll also really quickly do a batch of the smaller cookies. Again, give them space on the baking sheet, 1½ tablespoons. These typically need to bake for about 10 minutes. Regardless of the size you're making, when they are finished baking, they should have some light golden browning around the edges. Unlike many of my cookies, you actually don't want to underbake these because then they'll be a little bit too soft and fragile to decorate. Our large ones and our smaller ones. Now these cookies are going to need to cool before you can ice them, but they cool pretty quickly. I will usually let them sit on the baking sheet for a couple of minutes, and then once they're not too hot to handle, I will carefully remove them to a cooling rack to cool completely. Be gentle because they could be a little fragile while they're warm. You see that? That is a sign of improper mixing. Probably had a little bit of butter on the side of the bowl and scraped it up when I scooped. Terrible. Amateur. So we'll let these cool and we'll make our frosting. Now, we are not using a buttercream. Black and white cookies are made with what a lot of people call like more of a pourable fondant. It's very similar to a glaze, but it's enriched, and we're going to be using corn syrup to give us the proper texture. Now, we need a lot of powdered sugar for this recipe, so much that I kind of couldn't justify making more cookies because people looked and saw like 8 cups of powdered sugar. I thought they might lose their minds. So this is 4.5 cups of powdered sugar. Let's talk corn syrup. Light corn syrup is what you want for this recipe. Otherwise, your white frosting won't be very white if you use dark. I'm adding 4 tablespoons of corn syrup. No corn syrup left behind. Corn syrup, I feel is worth noting, is not the same as high fructose corn syrup. They are different. I'm comfortable using corn syrup. If you think you shouldn't use it, you could leave it out, but you're going to need more milk, and you're going to have like a richer, very sweet frosting that's more like a glaze. So it's doable, but it's not my preference. The corn syrup does add a nice touch. Now we'll add 3/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract in here. Now the exact amount of milk you need is going to range a little bit. I have 4 tablespoons measured out here for now. I'm going to add like 3 tablespoons of it, and you can whisk everything together using a whisk if you prefer. I like to make things easier and use my mixer, and just stir everything together until it's combined. And then we'll add more milk as needed to get to the right texture and the right consistency. So what I'm looking for is a consistency that just kind of ribbons off the whisk when I lift it, and then it holds its shape for several seconds before it dissolves back into the bowl. All right, let's check on our cookies, make sure they're nice and cool, and they are. So the thing with black and white cookies is you're not going to ice the tops, you're going to ice the bottoms, which is why I flipped some of them. I'll flip the rest over. Now decorating can get a little bit messy, so I will usually lay down some wax paper to catch all the spills. Oh no! Cookie down. And then we're going to frost the whole bottom of the cookie with white frosting. And you can use a piping bag for this if you want. Sometimes I do, but normally I'll just take a generous amount of the frosting and slide it over the cookie. And this is why it's important your cookies are a little golden brown and that they're cooled completely. Otherwise, they're going to start to break at this point. Nikki says I'm shaking. Too much caffeine today. I'm just really excited about the cookies. So I do all of the cookies with a layer of the white frosting first. The big ones need more. I do always like to try to make sure the icing goes over to the edge so the whole surface of the cookie is covered, and if it spills, it's really not a big deal. There's a little extra with this frosting recipe, so you have a little wiggle room. Now we have our white half done. We need the black half. So to do this, we're just going to take 4 teaspoons of Dutch cocoa powder, add that in and stir it in. And you'll notice that despite the fact that they're called black and white cookies, half of them is going to be pretty brown. If you want a true black, you're going to have to add like a little bit of black food coloring. And I also tested this recipe using black cocoa, which works, but then you no longer have the like authentic black and white flavor. It kind of tastes like an Oreo cookie instead, because that's just the flavor of black cocoa. And after you add the cocoa, it's going to dry it out a bit. So just add like another splash of milk until we get back to that consistency that we had before. There you go, that looks good. Now, if I'm trying to make these look super polished, I'll usually put the chocolate frosting in a piping bag and I'll pipe it on. If I'm a little less particular, I'll take the chocolate icing, draw a line, and then once I have half of it mostly filled in, I'll use an offset spatula to nudge the frosting and cover that half. Make sure you support these large cookies in the center. The frosting takes some time to set. How long it takes is going to depend on the humidity of the day, your kitchen, exactly how wet you made your frosting, a lot of factors. I recommend letting them sit for at least an hour, and usually that's not long enough. Sometimes I'll even leave them sitting on my counter overnight. I don't cover them or anything, I just let them sit so they're completely dry. If you bite into them while the frosting's still wet, it seems too sweet and it's not enjoyable. It's not an enjoyable cookie to me. So I recommend letting the frosting set completely. So once the frosting has set, it should be nice and smooth. I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and if you try it, let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. That is a big cookie. Here, you can see the inside. You can see it's a like nicely cakey. It's a really nice tender crumb. It's really good. One more. Almost had an accident. Low speed, slow down. I feel like my face is weird. It just feels weird. It's on my arm. Gosh, I'm shaking today. No! That was my favorite one. I'm so cool.